Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are. Hosted by Desiree Duffy.
It is time once again for us to gather around the radio, my bibliophiles. Welcome! It is time for Books That Make You, and I'm your host, Desiree Duffy. And today, we're talking about books that make you heal your brain, specifically from a brain injury. What happens if we find ourselves, or perhaps a loved one, with a brain injury, like a stroke or a concussion? How can we cope? Did you know, for example, that even if somebody seems to recover full brain functionality after a concussion, they could still have problems? Following a major or a prolonged emotional or even physical trauma, the TBI, the traumatic brain injury, could easily resurface and manifest itself as other illnesses. Now just think of your loved ones who have been in accidents, or maybe sports injuries are big, or if something happened on the job, and so much more. Now here's the thing, cooking can actually be a therapy and a great way to eat healthy too. And I know you might not think of cooking as being that kind of strategy, but Susana Stoica does. She wrote the bestseller Cooking After Brain Injury, Easy Cooking for Recovery, and she is dedicated to people who are trying to recover from traumatic brain injury. Now, this is kind of a new way of thinking of cooking, and it deals with a lot of those issues that are typically related to brain trauma. Problems with concentration and figuring out what foods and what dishes go together. And she also wrote the book Heal Your Brain, Reclaim Your Life, How to Recover and Thrive After Concussion, as well as Reluctant Healer, an Introduction to Energy Healing. And she is just an amazing woman. She's done presentations on brain injury recovery. She's talked to schools, to doctors, to nurses. She has been spoken with Kaiser Permanente and schools like the University of Michigan and Ann Arbor, Wayne State University, etc., etc. Susana, wow, what a great resume. Thank you for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on the show.
I am excited to learn about your book because it's so unexpected. It's something that I never would have really thought of, and that's what attracted me to it. So can you tell us about Cooking After Brain Injury? Why are these books important? Why did you publish them?
I have to go a little bit back in time. In February 2000, I had two brain injuries, traumatic brain injuries, in the same day. I live in Michigan, and we had a beautiful day, which means clear skies, sunshine in February, which made the surface of the ice melt and create what's called here black ice, which means you don't see the ice, but it's there. And I fell. I fell from a standing position, nothing on my head, backwards, and hit my head. And because I was working at a medical practice as a resident healer, I knew that people would be coming shortly to see the doctor. So I bought some salt in the confused state I was in, and I tried to put it down, and I fell a second time, hitting my head again the same way. That put me in a situation where I couldn't function at all. I speak several languages very well, and I couldn't remember words in any of the languages I spoke. I speak also a few others not as well. I couldn't find words in any of the languages. I was in horrible pain, couldn't make sense of the world around me. Mm-hmm. It was very difficult because my main job at the time was as a highly qualified engineer. Mm-hmm. So suddenly I wasn't capable of doing anything, which was both physically and emotionally very traumatic. Now, when I started to recover a little bit, my family started complaining that I wasn't cooking. They liked so much my cooking that usually they refused to go out to the restaurants because they would tell me that my cooking was better than they can buy for a lot of money. And I decided to try. Now, whoever had brain injury knows how difficult it is to do anything that requires step-by-step procedures. Mm-hmm. And also, you cannot assume any steps as being known. So I had to rewrite my recipes that I used to make in very minute detail in order to be able to cook again. And I remember the first recipe, it took me more than a week to write it up. And then I cooked just going step by step, erasing the steps that I went through so I wouldn't mess up. Slowly, as I was cooking, I devised more and more recipes because you can't cook one recipe all the time, of course. Mm-hmm. And I realized how much help it was for me to recover my concentration, to recover my dexterity of doing different things physically. Also, it helped me with being able to focus on steps to the individual steps and not being distracted so easily.
So this was really a type of therapy that you discovered because of your love of cooking, and it was something that other people could apply too. And being able to follow a recipe, so you have lots of benefits there. You're retraining your brain, so to speak, as well as putting food on the table.
Yes, I knew from my work, before I had my brain injury, I already was working for many years with people with brain injury as a healer. Mm-hmm. And I knew that the more different things you are doing as a brain injured person, the faster you recover. And when I realized that I had all these recipes, and some were extremely simple, and some were quite complicated, I realized that I could help a lot of people by putting together books that are increasingly more and more difficult. Mm-hmm. And that's what the books are about. You have to take book 1 and be comfortable with it, and book 2, and eventually go back to book 1 if you want to. But it has to be done in order by somebody with brain injury. What the bonus was about it is when I finally published books 4 and 5, which are the most complicated recipes, I was cooking up a storm, and when I finished, I realized even such a long time after brain injury, by cooking through the books, I further improved my cognitive abilities, which was amazing for me.
That is amazing, and I love the fact that you start out easy. It's almost like taking it one step at a time so people can keep learning, and like you said, if they feel they need to, they can always go back to the first books. How many books are in the series at this point, and are more coming out?
There are 5 books in the series, and I know from my own experience that once you get to book 5, you should be able to cook normal recipes. Mm-hmm. Now, what's happening with normal recipes in usual cookbooks, certain steps are assumed as the person who is cooking knowing them. So they are not detailed. And I found out that it is possible to cook with normal recipes once you get through the 5 books. Mm-hmm. And you are comfortable with all 5. So basically the therapy part of the books is done.
And how about the recipes themselves? Can you tell us about some of the recipes, and are the foods and the ingredients that they're using, do they benefit brain health in any way?
What I did, I decided when I started cooking again that if I am already starting from ground zero, I will put in the box whatever is healthy. Mm-hmm. So the books are very healthy for people with diabetes. They are rated. Each book has a table of rating the recipes according to allergens. So if none of the recipes have any soy. They are rated if they have milk or not, if they have grains or not, if they have eggs, and so on. So people who have certain allergies can choose recipes that are suitable for them. Also, when I have a recipe with milk, usually butter only, as a milk product, I write on them if it's possible to replace the butter with an equal amount of oil. So people who would like the recipe but they can't take milk products, they still can have the recipe.
That's fantastic and so important because, yes, so many people have other ailments and allergies. My goodness, that's something else. Can we talk a little bit specifically about brain injury? So you had a concussion, or actually two concussions. In some cases, it's a stroke that can cause this. Can you talk about that a little bit and how people can spot or know? It sounds like you were putting down the salt because you didn't know what had happened to you.
What happens with a person who has, usually a person with stroke will know, because they start drooping, the mouth started drooping, or they can't use their hand, or the foot is dropping, so they would know exactly. But when you have a concussion, the biggest problem with concussion is that many times it's not visible. And even if people know that you fell and you hit your head, it's not a visible injury unless you have some bleeding. Mm-hmm. And people are not very sympathetic. So they will tell you, just get hold of yourself. And you can't. It's impossible to get hold of yourself. So I'm educating people of how it feels to be brain injured. Mm-hmm. You can't concentrate. As much as you are trying to be the person who were before the brain injury, you can't. But it's not visible to the people around you. So if somebody tells you that they have headaches and they feel dizzy and they can't remember after they had a brain injury, take them seriously. Even if the MRI doesn't show anything and cognitive tests maybe are marginal, don't accept, even if you are older, that it's old age that is happening to you. Dig in, rest, because sleep is the best healer for the brain. Make sure you sleep enough, and it's very important to drink enough water, good quality water. Mm-hmm. I have seen people who are older who don't drink enough water, and literally I can see inside the brain, and I could see their brain being dried up. And once they started, if they didn't do it for a long time, when they started drinking, they started recovering cognitive abilities.
What do you mean you can see that the brain is dried up? Are you talking on an MRI scan, or are you talking that it's something that you sense?
I can sense it, yes. Mm-hmm. As a healer, I kind of see the structures of the body, and I can feel what's happening in different parts of the body.
And so hydration, very important. And I know, too, we mentioned it in the beginning a little bit. I was talking about how some of the information I was reading through, in some cases, the brain injury can impact or cause other things down the road, even much farther down the road. You want to talk about some of the other ailments that people might experience and how it might be related back to a previous brain injury?
For example, I had a colleague who started having, at 29 years old, suddenly he was having these grand mal epileptic seizures, which is the worst case of epileptic seizures. And he went to the doctor and got epileptic medication, but couldn't stop the grand mal seizures. They weren't as frequent, but it was still really bad. And I checked him out, and I found out the very first time I touched his head, I found a very small area, like the nail on your little finger, that he was missing a piece of his skull. And it wasn't detected on any of the x-rays because they were taken from other angles. He didn't even know about it. And I asked him to go back to the doctor and have an x-ray done, and I told him where it is exactly, so to do the x-ray so they get exactly from that specific angle. And it was confirmed by the x-ray. And I worked with him, and I told him I could perceive that he had a brain injury when he was very young. And for some reason, it's very interesting that sometimes people remember these occurrences only 24 hours later. So I proceeded to work with him, and 24 hours later, he called me up. He said, I remember. He was originally from India, and people, when he was a child, they used to go up on the roof at night to cool down. And as a 4-year-old, he was running around with his cousins, and he fell off the roof. And he got injured. And we worked a few times, and we were able to stop the grand mal seizures.
That's amazing. And let's dig into a little bit, because it sounds like we're starting to head into the book, Heal Your Brain, Reclaim Your Life, How to Recover and Thrive After Concussion. So this is the theme and what you discuss in that book. Is that correct?
Yes. Actually, the book discusses also how to be prepared for a brain injury. So the doctors have a better way of diagnosing what's happening. MRI diagnostic is limited, as well as cognitive tests. And I found people who were diagnosed as being fine, and when I tested as a healer, I found that they had bruising, which wasn't visible on MRI. The MRI will pick up only if you have a broken skull or a major bleeding in the skull or a really bad inflammation following the brain injury. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of brain injuries that are just marginal. They are not picked up by the scan. For example, at one point I had a lady who started having grand mal seizures at 28, and she was cleared that she didn't have any problem. They did an MRI, and she would have grand mal seizures, interestingly, only when she had her period. So the medical solution was to stop her period. And because she wanted to have kids, her doctor sent her to me. And when I tested her, I found that, in fact, she had a bruising at the back of her head. And when I asked her about having a brain injury and having her head thrown back, she said, about a year before all of this started. So I was able to take out the inflammation, the bruising, correct the bruising of the field. And she went on to get off the medication, and today she has 3 beautiful kids.
Oh, that's amazing. What a great story. I love that. Because you speak in front of doctors and nurses and you help them. So is that who the books are for as well? I mean, obviously they're for people who have had some kind of a brain injury in their families, but do you also write these with the idea that the healthcare professionals should be taking notice?
Absolutely, because they see the brain injury from outside. I have the advantage of having the insider view of what happens with a brain injury. Plus, because being a healer, I can perceive at a more discrete level what's happening in the brain. For example, to give you an idea, I had recently a patient who was in Romania, in Europe, in Eastern Europe. And I was contacted by her daughter because she had intense headaches, and her mom was taken to the emergency. And when I checked the mom, I found that she had a bleeding in her brain, and I proceeded to stop it.
Wow.
And what was very interesting is that the MRI results came a day later of having the bleeding, and then she had a follow-up MRI and confirmed the bleeding having stopped. So what is interesting about the work I am doing is that I can see things that are not so accurately visible by the normal test procedure, medical test procedures.
Mm-hmm. That's the interesting thing and especially with your book, Reluctant Healer, An Introduction to Energy Healing. So you're helping physicians and doctors and nurses because you're coming at it in a different way and you're seeing things that they can't necessarily see.
Yes, and my biggest wish is that I could work with doctors to help them discover better ways of testing and diagnosing brain injuries.
I have to imagine that. I mean, it's great that you have talked with doctors and physicians, and they should definitely be reading your books, especially if they have open minds. But I can imagine you might get some resistance from the medical community as well.
Yes, because it's, look, I am an engineer by training. And it was very difficult for me to accept the fact that I'm a healer. You can imagine it's a completely different world from a very precise engineering profession doing something that is completely intuitive. It's not easy, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
So I understand the doctors that, first of all, they are afraid of lawsuits if they use my help.
Sure, yeah.
But I worked with doctors. I worked in a medical practice, and the doctors would have more business because of me, because I required them to be under the doctor's supervision in the medical practice. So it was a very good combination because I could help them diagnose very complicated cases. For example, people who are sick for a very long time, a lot of things start going bad in their system. It's like a deck of cards where one falls and the next falls and the next falls. So in those cases, they don't even know what test to run. While I can go into and see the energy field, and it's kind of a timestamp that I can perceive what happened first, what happened next. And if we go after what happened first, it's like pulling the rug from under all the construction. And people can get healthy much faster, not talking about that it's much cheaper not to run a lot of tests for nothing. So it's a real advantage to work with a doctor.
It sounds like it. It sounds like it's really just bringing in a lot of different ideas, modalities, and perspectives, and ultimately what's best for the patient is what's best for the patient. So there's that. Can you tell us, so, okay, you've got the 5 cooking books, and that's pretty much it, right? Or are you working on another cooking book, or is there something else that you've got in the works?
Right now, I am working on a version of the cookbooks that it's good for places that work with patients, like places that work with post-trauma recovery, which means they need a book which is easy to annotate. It's completely open. It's more expensive, quite a bit more expensive, but I found a way to make the pages such that you can annotate and erase repeatedly. And I am working on that one. I am also trying to see if I can make a series of demos or cooking demos with all the recipes that I have in the book.
Oh, because I love that idea.
Because it's easier to follow. Some people are able to follow the written word, but some people feel more comfortable with visual input. So if it would be something that they can look at and stop and do the step and then start it again and do the next step, I think it would be useful for places which work with brain injured.
Sure, that makes perfect sense. I love that. That's a great idea. Now tell us, Susana, where can people find you online, your website, find your books, find out more information about everything that you're up to?
I have a website which is very easy to find, which is healingbraininjury.com. And that website contains all the information. I have also a Facebook page, but all the important information is on my website. Because I know that for brain injured people, it's really difficult to look in many places.
No, it's a great website. And you're right, it's very easy. Just type in brain or healingbraininjury.com and you've got it. You're there. That's fantastic. Susana, I had so much fun talking to you today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on the show.
You bet, you bet. And you come back next time you have another book out. We'll do this all over again. And I look forward to, I'm going to have to grab one of these books just because maybe I don't have a brain injury that warrants it, but I love cooking and I love food. So I'm going to go try some of your recipes because I bet you they're just divine.
Thank you.
You bet. Once again, my name is Desiree Duffy. And thank you, everybody, for listening today here at the Books That Make You show. And you can find out more about us on the website. That is booksthatmakeyou.com. And we are on Facebook and Instagram. And we're always doing fun, bookish things. You can join us for Jingle Books, which is our online Facebook party, which is coming up soon. We are always doing fun, bookish contests and giveaways. And we do author interviews and book reviews and so much more. That's booksthatmakeyou.com. Until next time, all of my bookish buddies, please do me a favor and enjoy all of the books that make you exactly who you are.
The executive producer for Books That Make You is Desiree Duffy. Produced and sound mastered by Phil Giangrande. Engineering by Dave Nabox. Social media and promotion by Bree Sweeter. For more, visit booksthatmakeyou.com.